All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to paint their door a vibrant shade of blue. Others have the need to decorate their bathroom with fish, anchors, and other nautical items. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to leave up holiday decorations year-round. Others have the need to use their garage as practice space for their new metal band. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.
Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking, they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. On the night of May 28, 1977, the comedy team Teeter and McDonald was about 10 minutes into their usual warm-up act for the headliner in the cabaret room. They had started almost a half hour late because club personnel had been busy trying to fit as many people as possible in the room to see this big attraction. The headliner was a hot commodity, fresh-faced 70s sensation John Davidson. He was backstage shaving, getting ready to entertain the overbooked crowd in the main room at the Beverly Hills Supper Club in Southgate, a northern Kentucky suburb of Cincinnati, just across the Ohio River. Davidson had told audiences earlier in his engagement that he was breaking all attendance records held at the club. That was met with huge applause. The region loved this Pittsburgh boy done good. The crowd this night was still piling in when an 18-year-old busboy, a guy paid just $1.65 an hour, took the microphone from Jim McDonald. Even though the young man shook, he calmly said, "There's a fire. You have to leave. Go across the hall, go across the Empire Room." Some thought the good-looking blonde teenager was part of the act. Others may have seen his fear and heard something serious in his voice, prompting them to get out of their seats to move as orderly as possible to the exits. No one knew what was going on, not really. No one knew that, within minutes, the massive complex would be totally engulfed in flames. No one knew that some of the exit doors would be locked and, later, bodies would be found 6 and 7 high, struck as if frozen, charred beyond recognition in the desperate act of trying to get out. No one would have guessed that the wiring was faulty, that the club's owner, Richard Schilling, was not up on his fire inspections, that the ceiling tiles were highly combustible, that there were no sprinklers, that the cabaret room had been redesigned to make more room for seats, making it necessary to axe an exit that led directly to the outdoor garden. The list of what went wrong that night, or what was destined to go wrong if a fire broke out, would grow. But know this. If busboy Walter Bailey had decided not to go to work that night, and he had seriously pondered that because he hated his job, there's no question that more would have died. Still, despite his warning, one he chose on his own volition to give, 165 people went into the building that night to dine, dance, and be entertained, never to leave. Another 200 would be injured before they finally gasped the warm night air outside. The repercussions would be long and enduring for the families and for, really, an entire region of the country, but also for the history of civil law in the United States. Because this night, and these dead, and a pioneering Cincinnati lawyer would usher in the beginning of the modern class action lawsuit era. Together, they showed the way for American jurisprudence to get real justice from multiple corporate entities responsible for vast human tragedy. Admittedly, that's small consolation for the grieved, because the grief was surely in equal measure to the horror of that night, and that horror, even today, is palpable. Crimes of the Centuries is sponsored by Faye Nutrition. I swear, diet culture is overwhelming. I'm trying to get healthier right now, but I keep being bombarded with ads about products that are all focused on losing weight, but not necessarily on being healthy.
You don't need to lose weight.
Thank you. I do want to be healthy, though.
I could do better at that, too.
Faye Nutrition can help. Faye is a revolutionary platform that connects you with your own personal registered dietitian, making expert nutrition guidance accessible and affordable. Faye has a dietitian that's right for you. Look at this.
93% of Faye clients reported an improved relationship with food, and 85% reached their target weight. A third-party study showed that clients lost 2.9 times more weight working with a dietitian through Faye compared to comparable weight loss programs.
Faye has dietitians that specialize in over 30 areas, including women's health issues like PCOS and postpartum, gut health, eating disorders, and many more. Achieve lasting results with the help of a registered dietitian through Faye. Listeners of Crimes of the Centuries can qualify to see a registered dietitian for as little as $0 by visiting faynutrition.com/COTC. That's faynutrition.com/COTC. One last time.
That's faynutrition.com/COTC.
And make sure you use the URL so they know I sent you. Today, we'd call the Supper Club an entertainment venue, I guess, complete with several restaurants, 2 stages for Vegas caliber acts, a wedding chapel, and private party rooms for wedding receptions and birthday parties, family reunions, and business meeting dinners. All of that and more was happening that night, as the venue had played host earlier in the day and evening to 3 weddings. A gospel choir was having a special dinner. A loan association was doing the same. It was the 76-degree Saturday night of Memorial Day weekend, and the booming night spot was already too warm from so many people in too little space. In fact, as few as 5 years ago, still attached to a honeysuckle bush on the former side of the club was a picture of a leaning wedding cake in the middle of the zebra room. It was visibly melting from the heat before the fire began. All in all, the club covered 54,000 square feet of land and could hold up to 3,000 guests. It was in the middle of what you might be thinking is the least likely place on earth for Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin, Dionne Warwick, Jerry Lee Lewis, or the Righteous Brothers, and younger bucks like Davidson to trek to rake in the large dollars. And it wasn't. This was the showpiece of the Midwest, and those people had dollars too. Veteran musician Earl Clark remembers,
"We had all the best shows in the country. We had all the big shows at the same time that Las Vegas was getting its start."
Newport, Kentucky, just a stone's throw away from the venue, had been the Vegas of the 1940s. Think nightclub singers crooning as gamblers gambled and cigarette girls roamed and liquor flowed and beautiful women, some whom you could purchase for an hour an evening at a time, lounged. It was snazzy. Someone once said it looked like what a nightclub ought to look like. So yeah, the Supper Club and its predecessors had been around these parts a while. On this Saturday night in the late 70s, it was a more wholesome bunch in attendance, mostly upright citizens given a chance to put on fancy clothes and pretend to lead a glitzier existence. They'd all made their way to Southgate via US 27, driven up a winding, torch-lined entrance to get to the top of the hill, where the club attendants greeted you, took your car, and parked it themselves. Then, as a paying guest, you would pass through the swinging glass doors into 70s specific splendor. Velvet drapes, oil paintings, and tapestries on the walls, plush carpet underfoot.
The Beverly Hills Supper Club is the showplace of the nation. Outstanding entertainment nightly in the beautiful cabaret room. Let us plan your wedding or next party. We have 18 party rooms.
The rooms were probably purposefully labyrinthian. That was a ploy used in the old speakeasy days so that those at the front of the building could let those at the back know when the cops were on their way to catch the gamblers in action. Nothing was being hidden that day, some would later remark, except for crap wiring and fire code violations by the heaping handful. On that Saturday night, around 9, the busboy's announcement would officially end an era. Ever after, the glitz shifted irrevocably to the Nevada desert. It would have anyway, I guess, but if you need a clean demarcation line, this was it. There's a fire. A minute after Walter Bailey's mic grab, a call came into the nearby Fort Thomas Police Department. A minute after that, the Fort Thomas Fire Department dispatched 2 pumpers and an aerial truck to the locale. Southgate Fire Department, which is the city in which the club was located, also sent 2 trucks. The Newport Fire Department followed with another truck. An interview from WLWT.
The waitress come in and told us that we should get up and leave and that there was a fire, and just within 5 minutes the garden room had went up.
We immediately got up and we were sitting next to an exit and walked out. We just got outside when boom, the whole place went up.
I knew this was bad. I started yelling at the top of my voice how these people could go out a back entrance and down a back hall.
Chaos is a kind and inadequate word for what was happening inside the warren of warehouse-like rooms that comprised the supper club. By now, according to the Cincinnati Enquirer reporters writing at the time, the 400 members of the Savings and Loan League of Greater Cincinnati, all situated inside the Empire Room, were trying to get out. News traveled fast back then, even without a raft of selfies to inform us. The Associated Press put out a bulletin just after 9 that quoted a Fort Thomas police dispatcher as saying it, quote, looks like a bad one. There may be people trapped, end quote. The Enquirer newsroom, just about to put the Sunday paper to bed, went into high gear, ripping up the front page to make room for whatever reporters could find in the next few hours. Cincinnati Fire Captain Peter Sabino was, a moment before, still in line to get into the Davidson show. He found his way out and started working the fire in his best clothes. Less than 15 minutes later, black smoke hurled out of the building and was already shooting violently hundreds of feet into the air. People could be heard inside screaming. Those who could get out fled down the nearby hill to get away from the heat and the sound of others dying.
Major story this evening, the story of death and Holocaust at Beverly Hills Supper Club south of Newport in northern Kentucky.
The flames were like on top of the people's head. You could hear the screams in the building from the people.
People had panicked so badly, you could still see him in a running position, arms and legs frozen, whether he just fell, and I don't know if it was just the smoke getting him, but they were frozen in that position and trying to get him out.
By now, every fire department in the greater Cincinnati area was sending trucks and firefighters to Southgate as the magnitude of the disaster was becoming clear. Later, the flames would be reported to have reached 100 feet. The temperature inside the inferno was said to have reached 1,000 degrees. The area's doctors, nurses, and paramedics, ambulance services, and state police also raced to Southgate to help. A minute-by-minute accounting of the disaster reported in an early edition of the Enquirer included this, quote, at 10 p.m., the unofficial death toll was 50. At 11 p.m., at least 100 bodies had been counted. At about 11:30 p.m., police dogs were brought in to stop people from looting the dead bodies, end quote. A little after midnight, the walls of the gigantic structure collapsed and had almost completely burned to the ground. Hope for more survivors inside collapsed as well. Julian Carroll, then governor of Kentucky, raced in from Frankfort. He'd been playing pool with TV star Lee Majors at the time to be on site to do what he could. Mostly, he offered comfort to those who had escaped and to the professionals on scene who were overcome by the amount of death in front of them. He thanked those volunteering and made the vows that governors do in times like this. He'd get to the bottom of this. By 2:30 a.m. that Sunday, it was decided that the bodies of the largely unrecognizable dead should be taken to the National Guard Armory to be lined up men on one side, women on the other, to be identified by loved ones. Nurses took pains to wipe the soot from their almost faces, if possible, to aid in the identification process. Throughout that early morning, people arrived to find if their loved ones were among the dead. Most brought their family pastor or priest with them. Around 4 a.m., they were escorted by Army reservists or nurses or police, uncovering each face, one by one, to find relief or certainty. The faces of many of the dead were bright red from toxic gas inhalation, or, if burnt, they were close to skeletal. That Sunday morning wore on. A 13-year-old neighbor boy named Bill Klingenberg rode his bike over first thing to see up close what he had seen on TV the night before. The club was just a mile from his house, and he had seen the flames. Once on site, he found himself immediately giving directions to those unfamiliar with the area. He then volunteered to direct traffic outside the Fort Thomas Armory. He would soon be asked to move bodies from freezer trucks into the makeshift morgue. He watched as police cut fingers off the dead for identification. Remember, he was just 13. Judging from photographs taken of the morgue in those terrific hours, Bill was not the only teenager conscripted into hauling the dead from pews to freezer trucks to floors and to funeral home hearses. A University of Notre Dame basketball star, originally from the area, showed up to help as well, saying he was afraid to look at the faces of those he was ushering about. He was afraid he would see someone he knew. The armory scene was seared on everyone who saw it. Also on scene that night was the area's first mobile TV van, a recent innovation taken up by local Channel 12. With it came longtime anchor and legendary newsman Nick Clooney. Yes, this is George's father. Speaking to documentary maker Meg Vogel and Enquirer reporter Carol Motzinger, Clooney remembered that night.
I remember seeing at the armory, and naturally everybody had been covered, but one had, it was a woman, and she had silver shoes on. You couldn't help but think of what had been going through her mind earlier that evening when she put those shoes on. You know, gonna be a big night out, maybe with her husband, maybe with her family. And how it ended up.
The death toll continued to rise. When, on Sunday, the fire was extinguished and workers removed the tin roof that had fallen but still covered much of what was inside, a police spokesman told reporters they were finding, quote, 2 to 3 victims per 4 square feet, end quote. The vast majority, 125, were located near the north exit of the cabaret room, and 34 more were found lodged next to the southern exit in that room in a hallway. 2 more deceased were found in the Viennese room. Of those found closest to the north exit, 50 were jammed into a closet that, from the exterior, must have looked like the promised exit. 116 of those who were able to escape suffered severe burns. 3 others succumbed to their injuries after making it out of the fire. Of those, 2 died within a month of the blaze. The last died 9 months later. Clooney remembered standing next to a firefighter that night.
He was crying. He had no idea he was crying. You know, he was talking to himself. But he looked at me and suddenly saw me for the first time, I think. And he said, she was pregnant. He said, now, was that 1 or 2? He was trying to make notes for the report he knew he would have to make.
In fact, though the official number of dead would be 165, later litigation would stipulate the number to be 167, as 2 of the women who died that night had been pregnant. From Fascinating Horror.
As soon as the recovery operation was complete, an investigation was launched. It discovered a range of safety violations, including the absence of an alarm system, no firewalls, a profusion of flammable material in the building, no sprinklers, and no employee training.
It took a year before a Campbell County, Kentucky grand jury was impaneled to consider the criminal implications of the fire. It looked a little familiar. 6 years before this fire, in 1971, a similarly impaneled grand jury had led an inquiry into the fire safety of the Beverly Hills Supper Club following a small fire that took place there during remodeling. That probe had found that the club was not liable for injuries sustained that day, but found that 10 violations previously cited by officials at the Kentucky State Fire Marshal's office had not been addressed or corrected. So while manslaughter and reckless homicide were on the table in 1977, so was official misconduct, something which would apply to public officials who had not followed through on their public duty to protect people's safety. All of which might have been an easy sell to juries if the state had not ordered the site to be bulldozed just days after the smoke had cleared, per Governor Carroll. The rationale at the time was that authorities were looking for more bodies and needed to clear the rubble to find them. A lot of evidence was lost as a result, though the job was less than thorough. 40 years later, reporters allowed on the once scorched site could walk through the overgrowth on that hill and still see, peeking through the earth beneath their feet, the detritus of that night. Dinner plates, silverware, signs of life, reminders of death.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to paint their door a vibrant shade of blue. Others have the need to decorate their bathroom with fish, anchors, and other nautical items. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.
A few things to know before we go further. First, people died in the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire because there were so few ways out. They also died because the materials used to cover the venue's chairs and booths and carpets were made of a material that, when burned, let off toxic cyanide fumes that choke out available oxygen. Later, the medical examiners determined that most died of smoke inhalation and acute carbon monoxide intoxication, something which leads, before death, to confusion and fainting. They could easily have been unconscious while continuing to breathe the smoke that killed them. You know, the more I read about the fire, the more I kept coming back to those first minutes after Walter, who did escape, told guests to find a way out. I simply can't imagine what it was like in there as people clawed to escape and climbed over one another to find a way to get one more breath, which explains why they were found in heaps. Some, it was later reported, were found at their tables, likely having passed out before they could get out of their chairs. A woman, some survivors would later say, had climbed over tables and chairs as the gown she was wearing was in flames, and it's ghastly to consider. But you should know that a lot more people didn't die that night because Dr. John Hoyle, an administrator and emergency physician from St. Luke Hospital, was dining at the club with colleagues. They were seated in the Empire Room, waiting for dessert when told to evacuate. They wasted no time in leaving. As he moved with the crowd, Hoyle grabbed napkins, wetting them in nearby water glasses, handing them out to those nearby. "Cover your mouths and noses," he told people. He saw how the fire was moving through the room, snaking up the walls, cleaving the carpet. He knew if he could get out, he could do more. That's because Hoyle, when he had gotten to St. Luke a decade before, had decided to pioneer a disaster plan for just this kind of eventuality. His hospital had adopted it and practiced it. According to reporter Scott Wortman, who spoke to Hoyle in 2017, the plan, quote, included designations of what facilities nearby could become wards and where extra beds could be stored when not in use. It included created boxes of ready-to-go prescription medications often needed in emergencies. It included disaster drills, 6 of them every year for all hospital shifts, end quote. At the time, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Hospitals required only 2 such drills. Once safely outside the burning building, Hoyle made his way to the front entrance, grabbed a fire truck's radio transmitter, and, knowing that his people at St. Luke were monitoring the frequency, yelled into it, quote, "This is Hoyle. I'm at Beverly Hills. This is a large fire. Unknown number of casualties. Activate the disaster plan," end quote. And they did, showing up with what Enquirer reporter Carol Motzinger called, quote, "an emergency room in an orange box," end quote. Thus equipped, Hoyle did the necessary triage when the injured, now outside, were brought to him. Borrowing lipsticks from bystanders, he marked the foreheads of those injured with the medications he had given them already and in what dose. This was immensely helpful to the medical personnel waiting in ambulances and hospitals for the incoming injured. Hoyle also commandeered the pews from the wedding chapel as makeshift stretchers. His efforts saved lives, but of course, so many could not be helped. Dead in the fire were 7 staffers from a small crew of 18 who taught elementary school or worked in the school cafeteria in Jacksonburg, Ohio. The principal told reporters that the children were helping the rest of the staff cope with the loss. Nick Clooney never really got over the horror of that night.
I haven't done many interviews on this one, incidentally, because I don't like to talk about it. I don't like to talk about it right now. But I understand it's a historical moment, and I was there.
It wasn't just Clooney who struggled to talk about the fire. Scott Wortman, whose voice you might recognize from this show's ads because he's my partner, is still a reporter for the Enquirer and helped report a 40th anniversary piece about the fire.
I also always found it kind of interesting how the headliner that night, John Davidson, how that affected him throughout the rest of his life and how it was hard for him to even talk about it, and he lost like a band member.
It was Davidson's musical director who died that night, as did entire families of revelers. Everett Neal Jr. was a 27-year-old drummer in the Supper Club's house band. His 23-year-old wife, Paula, taught children with learning disabilities in Kenton County schools. They had been married 2 years. Everybody knew that Paula always accompanied Everett to his regular Saturday gig and often sat on the backstage couch while he played drums on the cabaret room stage. She had made it out of the fire that night, but after frantically searching for Everett in the chaos outside, she went back into the club to find him. He had also made it out and, unable to find Paula, decided to go back into the club to look for her. The building was likely fully engulfed at the time, but they both must have believed that love was greater than that. They both perished. So much sorrow and so many questions. That's because the club had a lot of dubious history. It was, like I said, a stalwart from the old unruly days in the early part of the century, but had been shut down first in 1961 during a gambling crackdown. Then, in June 1970, it was damaged by a fire which had started in the main dining room. Comedian Foster Brooks, a native of Louisville, told reporters from the Courier-Journal on the night of the 1977 fire that Beverly Hills, quote, was one of the most beautiful clubs I have ever seen anywhere, end quote. Still, he said that after performing at the club, he had told management that he would not return to the stage there unless a fire escape was built from the star's dressing area. Without one, he said, the place was a death trap. In hindsight, the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire was so preventable. There were so many red flags straight up ignored. From fascinating horror.
Witnesses gave unsettling testimony about visits to the club in the months before the fire, complaining that the cabaret room was often so crowded with bodies that waitresses couldn't reach patrons in order to serve drinks. In these conditions, a high death count was inevitable.
All told, there were 6 investigations into the fire. 4 months after it happened, Governor Carroll received an official report about the conflagration. In it, the owner of the club was determined to be in intentional violation of safety rules in its construction. It also said that government inspectors, specifically the Kentucky Fire Marshal's Office, failed to do anything about hazards at the club. It said that the owner had engaged in surreptitious behavior and had failed to live up to commitments made to other fire authorities. The report basically accused Schilling of hiding facts, lying when questioned, not living up to his promise to fix the cited violations, and generally just ignoring building codes that the nation, the state, and the city he operated in clearly mandated. Just a note, not once did the words aluminum wiring occur in the 188-page report. Now, the criminal probe faltered, concluding that the fire code violations did not rise to the level of criminality. In the 12 months after the Supper Club fire, local lawyers worked overtime to file lawsuits before the statute of limitations expired, and all those victims would lose out on some kind of reparation or some kind of peace. That meant that 1,100 defendants were ultimately sued in federal courts, thanks to the work of 300 attorneys who themselves did a bit of serious investigation into the cause of the fire via depositions and testimony. Some of the earliest filed suits were settled, matters resolved between private parties. But by December 1978, a great bulk of the suits were combined and put in front of U.S. District Judge Carl Rubin, a Nixon appointee, who explained that the class action lawsuit he would be hearing would be broken into two parts. It was not the first time, but it would be the most significant time when faulty aluminum wiring would be cast as the ultimate villain in the fire. First, and before the second part could be heard, it had to be determined if the bad wiring had, in fact, caused the blaze. If so, then a second part of the trial could begin to determine who should pay and how much and to whom. It was the first time any of the Supper Club associated lawsuits would go before a jury. Stanley Chesley, one of Cincinnati's most visible and most respected attorneys, would be joined by a few other attorneys, but he would be the one to argue on behalf of those who had died or were injured in the fire. An army of various law firms represented the 28 defendants and one nonprofit testing lab that Chesley named as contributors to the 165 deaths. In his opening statement, Chesley said that evidence would show that the reconstruction efforts in 1970 were done by an electrician who believed that aluminum wiring was a safe product. But, he said, he had proof that those who manufactured and sold it knew better. He said, quote, what he installed was a series of time bombs in the Beverly Hills Supper Club, end quote, all of which were hidden within 6 miles of catacomb-like interior wiring. The fire itself, he said, started at an unoccupied receptionist desk behind a wall that adjoined the Zebra Room, and it hadn't started particularly sneakily. Remember, people had been gathered there for a wedding reception.
The guests in the Zebra Room left early, after complaining that the heating in the room was far too high, and that they could hear a lot of strange banging or popping noises.
Ultimately, the industry experts had to admit that they knew that the wiring could catch fire from overheating. And this was a bombshell. It was now just a matter of how much victims would be compensated for their loss. 10 years later, by June 1987, the legal wrangling was done. More than $40 million had been awarded in settlements. Ballparking this to today's money, that'd be about $120 million. Courier-Journal reporter Judy Bryant did the heavy lifting for me here, summing up how Chesley and his team went about winning this case and created a basic formula that would serve as a template for other class action lawsuits. She wrote, quote, their strategy was to tier defendants into groups and demonstrate industry-wide liability, end quote. Of the 1,100 defendants that Chesley et al. Had named, one was a group of 8,950 insurance companies who operated as a rate-setting group. That group had inspectors who knew of wiring problems with aluminum in general, and more specifically, at the Supper Club. Those problems, up until the day of the fire, only meant that Schilling paid more in insurance premiums instead of being forced to fix the issues. Ultimately, the defendants had to dish out a little more than $40 million to the plaintiffs named in the suit. The insurance companies were forced to pay $4.7 million. Richard Schilling was forced to pay $3 million because he demonstrated that was all he had. Another $5.75 million came from Union Light Heat and Power Company, which supplied the electricity to the building. Then there was another $14.1 million payout from aluminum wiring manufacturers, another $4.5 million from manufacturers of various other products and materials used in the club, plus, $8 million in interest that had accrued from the date of the fire until the settlement was reached. And after all that, a court-appointed special master employed a mathematical formula to determine which plaintiffs received what in remuneration. It was a satisfactory outcome if you're talking in financial terms, I guess. I honestly don't know how much money does to ease grief. But I do know that one group of people weren't really happy that the aluminum wiring people were held responsible. And I'm not just talking about the manufacturers and insurers of that bunch. I'm talking about the crowd in the Cincinnati area who believed then, and believe now, that fire code violations were not to blame. They say the mob burned down the supper club, and they say they have proof. David Brock was, like Walter Bailey, an 18-year-old busboy at the supper club the night of the fire. Brock, along with Robert Webster and Tom McConaughey, wrote The Beverly Hills Supper Club, the untold story behind Kentucky's worst tragedy. In that book, which was self-published in 2012, the trio point to the history of mafia links in the region. This is Webster speaking.
City of Newport and really northern Kentucky in general, parts of greater Cincinnati, had some corruption, some crime, some gambling, even as early as the late 1800s with slot machines and things of that nature. Prohibition, of course, was the major influence on bringing illegal activities into the region.
Newport was, in fact, originally nicknamed the nation's Sin City. Las Vegas didn't steal the title until after the turn of the 20th century. This plays into the history of the Supper Club, which was originally called the Beverly Hills Country Club. The Cleveland Mafia owned it for a time, according to a 1978 article in Cleveland Magazine. Now, the book contends that Richard Schilling was unwilling to sell the prosperous club to the Mafia connected, hence the 1970 arson fire, which did not succeed in forcing Schilling's hand. Thus, the repeat arson in 1977. And reporter Scott Wortman is skeptical about this particular leap as to causation, but that doesn't mean he discounts the mob having played any role at all, at least inadvertently.
I think regardless of whether the mob set it on fire or not, I think they are still a major part of the story because they are the reason it was the destination and it was this showpiece that it was the night of the fire. They built it up to be that destination and why there were so many people there. So I think that's still a big part of the story.
Anyway, Brock says that while he was setting up the Zebra Room on the morning of the 1977 fire, he witnessed interlopers working in restricted areas. Others reported unusual sightings as well. They launched a new ad hoc investigation through which they obtained some photographs that had been previously stashed away in the home of a former Kentucky state official. Those pictures, they told Fox 19 reporters, show that an intentionally set electric fire started in the basement.
A furnace filter washer unit where they took a 220 motor and ran it through two 110 outlets with bare wires. And this particular unit was on a timer, so that when that surge hit it electrically, we've got a picture of it in the book. It's got a hole in it this big and right there.
Webster, speaking to the public at the Beringer Crawford Museum in Covington, Kentucky, laid out their findings.
There's no physical evidence whatsoever to indicate faulty aluminum wiring had anything to do with this fire. Though there were some minor code violations, no deaths occurred as a result of those violations. Nearly a dozen witnesses had told authorities immediately after the fire about suspicious activities they had seen. None of those made the Kentucky State Police report. Most initial investigators pointed to the basement. Some investigators, including the fire marshals, were kept from going downstairs after Monday. evidence of either a cover-up or conspiracy involving Governor Carroll and or the Kentucky State Police, and that the fire spread up from the basement within the walls and into the ceilings, then burned down from above.
Wortman again.
There were some reports from the governor, nothing conclusive, that just said, oh, it's electrical wiring. But really the only official court findings came from the class action lawsuit that Stan Chesley filed. The supper club was burned down in 1936 by the mob for arson. There was another fire when the last owner was renovating it in 1970. That was suspicious. I don't know if that was determined to be arson or not, but it had been burned down before intentionally.
The state police did not discount the new work done on the case, but found that there was too little evidence existing to do more. Busboy Brock was also part of an effort to establish a permanent marker on the site, commemorating those who died that night. Many efforts to develop the site in the ensuing 40 years have been obstructed by those who felt it disrespectful to those who died there. That ended in 2020 when the property was sold and the new developer agreed to call the area Memorial Point and erect a permanent stone monument there. It is now being developed into housing. Stanley Chesley perfected his class action formula in multiple lawsuits in the years that followed. If you know my Firstborn podcast Accused, you might recognize his name because we talked about him in Season 3, the case about David Box, who worked at the Feed Materials Production Center, aka Uranium Processing Plant, in Fernald, Ohio. In that case, Chesley represented Fernald workers in a class action lawsuit. But his list of cases seems never-ending. He sued over faulty electrical wiring, faulty HVAC, and faulty alarm systems in the MGM Grand Hotel fire in Las Vegas, and on behalf of veterans against those who manufactured Agent Orange. He represented those who died when Pan Am 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland after a terrorist bomb detonated in the cargo hold. He sued Dow Corning over its defective breast implants and worked on behalf of the horribly injured who suffered when a Union Carbide plant leaked highly toxic gas in Bhopal, India. In that case, 3,787 people died and 574,366 were injured. The case was settled for $470 million. He was also part of the attorney group that brought down Big Tobacco. Reporter Wortman was in his office once when they were discussing the off-gassing that caused some of the deaths in 1977. Chesley reached into his desk and took out a piece of the material to show the reporter.
And he burned a piece of it. It's like, you see, you smell that? That's almonds. That means that's the presence of cyanide, and that's what made the smoke so deadly. And why people died like that, before they could even try to get out.
Wortman said he then asked Chesley if maybe they should open a window. But Chesley was proud that safety standards about everything from sprinkler systems to fire exit passageways to furniture construction got much stricter after the landmark case. Later, Chesley got caught up in some scheme, which he contended he was unaware of, involving those he represented against the weight loss drug manufacturer of Fen-Phen in 1997. For that, he was disbarred. At 88, he remains married to a federal judge. Post-fire, John Hoyle, the hero emergency doctor, received inquiries from 34 states and 3 foreign countries to help them get up to speed on disaster care. He wrote a book on how to handle mass trauma, which was well received. Later, employed by the U.S. Public Health Service, he converted an old Army hospital into a training facility for medical personnel in handling disasters. It's now run by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Throughout his life, Hoyle carried tangible reminders of the Supper Club fire. He kept newspaper accounts of the disaster, as well as the white dinner napkin he had wrapped around his mouth and a tube of well-used red lipstick. The only thing he would say about that night about his own contribution was, quote, "We saved lives and we eased pain," end quote. Bill Klingenberg, the 13-year-old who helped move bodies the morning after the fire, had before that day played basketball on the Armory's courts. After he helped lay out the dead there for identification, he never came back to play again. Maybe he just wasn't a boy anymore. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson began by reading most of the archival pieces about the fire and its aftermath that appeared in 1977 to 1987 in the Cincinnati Enquirer and the Louisville Courier-Journal and Times. Reporter Scott Wortman, who's covered aspects of the fire in his 20-year tenure at the Enquirer, gave her significant help in sorting out details. She's super grateful. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/grabbagcollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this show was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com.